This is Christian Perring, and this is going to be a presentation on moral egoism. And I'm going to take the unusual position of not saying that moral egoism is right, but I am going to say that it's as defensible as most other moral theories when considered in a reasonable version. I think all the moral theories are just obviously wrong when you consider them in very strict versions. And then when you take them in more moderate versions, then they become more plausible. And that's equally true of moral egoism. So it's a slightly different take than you normally get on moral egoism, because most people say, oh, moral egoism is just totally wrong in any form. And I'd say, well, actually it's kind of plausible in a very moderate form. So that's where we're going with this. So here we are with the first slide. Now we can distinguish between moral egoism as a moral theory and psychological egoism as a psychological theory. So moral egoism is the basic idea that we should put ourselves first. And as I just indicated, it can come in various strengths of claim, and that's what we're going to talk about. But it's useful to distinguish moral egoism from psychological egoism. The psychological theory is a claim about human beings that human beings are basically selfish. Or in a strict form, it's a claim that necessarily humans always act in their own personal interest. Now, psychological egoism is definitely implausible as a strict theory. There seem to be all sorts of cases where people sacrifice themselves for others, and you can be a bit skeptical about it, and you can say, well, somebody's just doing it to look good, or something like that. But there do seem to be genuine cases where people genuinely make decisions to sacrifice themselves for others, not for any sake of appearances or because of the benefits they're going to get as a result. No, it's because they genuinely decide that it's that's what they want to do. So psychological egoism as a strict theory saying that it's always impossible to do anything for others for the sake of others is very implausible. On the other hand, it is fairly plausible that most of us are selfish most of the time. So maybe a moderate version of psychological egoism is pretty plausible. So this moderate version would say that, you look at people who take risks. You can make plausible cases that for people like firefighters or soldiers, and mostly people like that, they may do it for the sake of others, but also they do it because they think it's going to work out for them. So you can say, yeah, occasionally people make sacrifices for others, but on the whole, people actually act in their own best interest. And sometimes they do risk-benefit analyses. Sometimes they do it mistakenly, being over-optimistic about their chances. I think the case of parents and children is an interesting one, and why do parents who deliberately choose to become parents do that? They certainly make sacrifices for their children, and maybe it's because they either want to get their kids to help them in their older age, or else they think that having kids makes their life more fulfilling. So it's still ultimately a selfish act. So a lot of the cases of self-sacrifice that we see can be at least largely explained in some kind of selfish by appeal to saying, well, actually this is people actually doing it for themselves, not for others. All right, so that's psychological egoism, and now we can talk about moral egoism. So extreme moral egoism would say you should only care about yourself, and to care about anyone else is wrong. And you should never help a stranger in need unless it will be good for you. Now, if you were going to believe in morality, then it seems that just goes against anything we know about morality. Now, you might decide to be a moral anti-realist and say, well, there's no such thing as morality. And it's important to be clear that moral egoism is not an anti-realist theory, it's a realist theory. It's saying it is morally right just to do what's good for you. So if you're going to go for moral egoism, then the extreme version is not at all plausible. So let's look at moderate moral egoism. This makes much more moderate claims. It says, you should put yourself first and those you love above others. So the idea is that, if you love somebody, then you care about them and you want them to get stuff, so you will do things for them. But doing that is kind of basically selfish, because you do it because you love them. Or at least, I think it's sort of complicated. The idea of when you love someone, then you and that person's interests, they become kind of merged. So, there can be cases where you love someone and their interests go directly against yours, and those become tricky cases. But I think for the most part, if you love someone, then it works out pretty well that if you help them, then that is kind of serves your greater interests too. All right, so like I said, the moderate moral egoism would say, you should put yourself and those you love above others. You have an obligation to make your own life good. You can have an interest in your family's future. The interests of those you love are often extensions of your own interests. And basically, you don't have any obligations to strangers. So my claim is that this is not that this theory is correct, but this theory is pretty plausible, and as plausible as utilitarianism or a kind of strict a Kantian theory. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, it's almost universal to say that moral egoism is a form of consequentialism, but that just seems to assume far too much. It doesn't seem that moral egoism has to be a form of consequentialism. It can be. There can be different forms of moral egoism. You can try to maximize the benefits to yourself, but you could also see it as a kind of virtue ethics. And you become the right kind of person to look after yourself and those you love, and you develop those virtues. It could also fit with a moral rules approach. If you can find a bunch of moral rules that fit with moral egoism, then you could take those. So it seems that moral egoism can go various ways, depending on how you want to develop it. So here are some possible virtues that the moral egoist and of the moderate version would want to develop. So most obviously, you care for the self, work in self-interest, broadly construed. You develop yourself, you care for your family, and then you have friendships. And friendships are important, to lead a good life. So a moderate moral egoist is certainly going to want to have friendships. And then there is justice. There's no reason why a moral egoist can't believe in justice. They just don't see it as the most important thing, and they can see it as it's kind of useful in a society, and it helps you live your life. So yeah, you go for justice. And also, maybe way down the list of priorities, but you can also say a moderate moral egoist will be ready to help others when it doesn't significantly have any costs. So yeah, they'll go. A moderate moral egoist will certainly be ready to help others in circumstances such that it's not a huge inconvenience. So I guess part of my claim here is that people are strongly connected to each other. So when you think about moral egoism and the idea of the self, then that's a strict version says only you count, and it doesn't make any difference what other people experience. But that seems to be just not true. We are deeply connected with other people. So a moderate moral egoism will take that into account and say your interest and other people's interests are deeply connected. And we are connected with our families, and then to lesser extents our community, our town, our state, our nation, and our world. And we're very social animals. So the whole point of taking that into account is that once you understand that, then that fits very well with moderate moral egoism. So our interests are very strongly connected with the interests of other people. Now, as I've said, they can diverge, and then we're going to have to deal with those sorts of cases of divergent interests. It's also worth noting that acts of generosity and doing volunteer work, for example, can make our lives better. So that can be a perfectly good reason to engage in those things. Now, what about extreme self-sacrifice? What's a moderate moral egoist going to say about that? Some of the standard examples you see in literature are the soldier who throws himself on a grenade to save comrades, or the teacher who puts himself in front of a shooter in order to protect his students. Well, I think those are tricky cases, but I don't think they obviously disprove moderate moral egoism. I guess one thing about soldiers is that they are very closely connected. The whole point of a military group, especially kind of soldiers on a battlefield, is that you make those people very, very reliant on each other. And so their interests are deeply interconnected and they deeply care about each other. So obviously in throwing yourself on a grenade to save your comrades, that is a case of self-sacrifice, but it's also doing something for people you care deeply about. And I think the case of the teacher who puts himself in front of a shooter in order to protect their students, I mean, maybe it's done out of a sense of duty and kind of something like that, but again, I think probably it's due to when teachers really care about their students. So they feel like their interest and their students' interest are deeply connected. So I'm not sure that moderate moral egoism is going to be like very enthusiastic about these cases and say, oh yeah, definitely that's the right thing to do. But it might say, well, you know, it kind of it makes some sense. So it may not be celebrating these cases as cases of which really make a lot of sense, but they do make I know, some sense, and so I think that it's going the position of the moderate moral egoist is going to be. These aren't clear counterexamples to my theory, and well, yeah, that's where I want to stop there. Now, what about supererogatory acts? You know, when you do something which goes above and beyond your duty. Often examples are like giving to charity or helping strangers. And I don't see anything particularly threatening to moderate moral egoism about supererogatory acts. You know, so why not give to charity? You're not going to see the benefits yourself, but you know you care about the world, and it makes you feel a little good to kind of give to charity. And I guess the primary thing I'd want to say is that we can have a value scheme where we acknowledge it's good to do things for other people with moderate moral egoism. It's just not the most important thing. According to moderate moral egoism, the most important thing is to care for yourself. And then you go down, once you've done all the ways to care for yourself, then and the caring for yourself includes caring for the people you love. And once you've done all of that, then why not do something for other people? It's like a kind of add-on thing. So my claim is that moderate moral egoism can accept there are secondary goods involving helping others for no benefit or even with sacrifice. It just doesn't think that those are the most important things. Now, as I've said, moderate moral egoism hasn't really even been defended. I mean, I haven't really seen it articulated. To me, it seems a fairly obvious theory. Maybe this idea that caring for people you love is not egotistical. It's like, well, maybe people don't want to classify it as a form of egoism because they say that if you love people, then you're not egotistical. But I think that's a sort of psychological mistake. We are enmeshed in other people, so caring for other people it's like I think basically you could put it as a kind of the idea of an extended self. If you love somebody, then your self is extended into them. Now, there have been some people who have defended moral egoism, most notoriously Ayn Rand, and I guess some people like Ayn Rand, but the arguments by Ayn Rand that I've seen have been entirely unconvincing. What I want to say is that even though moderate moral egoism hasn't been defended, I think it's worth considering as a moral theory. Now, is there any evidence for the theory? I mean, basically, obviously when you start talking about evidence or reasons to believe a moral theory, you're on pretty thin ice, because none of these theories actually have a whole lot of reason for them. But it does seem to fit with evolutionary psychology that that's at least we would be kind of moderate moral egoists. And I guess the reason I want to defend moderate moral egoism is that it actually seems to me to fit in very well with most of the people I encounter. Very few people really want to are actually focused on helping strangers or living strict moral rules or anything like that. Maybe a few philosophers are, but most people don't live like that. Most people focus on caring for themselves and caring for their families, caring for the people they love. So in some ways, I guess the whole reason I want to suggest moderate moral egoism is a reasonable theory is I think it's actually the theory that most people live by. Now, since I've defended the idea that it's sort of egotistical to do stuff for the people you love, maybe there's actually not that much difference between this and care ethics. Care ethics says that you should care for the people you care for. I guess the putting it like that suggests that there's not really a whole lot to care ethics, and I guess I'll reserve judgment about that. But the basic idea is that caring is a very important activity, a part of life, and the moderate moral egoism I want to defend is actually quite close to that. So caring is a very important part of life, and when you care for people, then you do stuff for them, and you believe in that because your interest and their interest are so closely bound up. So both theories are going to favor developing relationships. Family and friendship are kind of highly important for people. And moderate moral egoism raises the issue about caring for yourself. And care ethics says some stuff about caring for yourself, but it doesn't go on about it very much. Whereas, obviously, moderate moral egoism is largely focused on caring for yourself. And so I'd say that it raises the question for care ethics. Now, how much should we care for ourselves versus caring for others? I think rather obviously moderate moral egoism is a kind of personal moral theory. It's not a theory which is going to be very useful in policy making, for example. But as a theory about how we should live our lives on a personal scale, I think it makes a fair amount of sense. We're going to need different theories for working out how to run a society, how to run democracy, whether or not to tax people or not, and whether we should care for the future. Those sorts of things, I think, they will need to come out of from a different direction. Now, one of the big kind of reactions to egoism is like, oh yeah, the basic egoism is defending being an asshole. You just all you do is care about yourself. But I think rather obviously the version of moderate moral egoism I want to defend would definitely be totally against that. I mean, assholes are both nasty and unpopular, and their lives don't necessarily go that well because they are constantly in conflict. So I don't think there's anything about moderate moral egoism which necessarily requires somebody to be an asshole. I mean, you do put yourself and your loved ones first rather than strangers. And I guess maybe that makes you a little bit of an asshole. But on the other hand, that doesn't seem like that unreasonable to me. So I guess I want to say you can be a moderate moral egoist and be a perfectly pleasant and considerate person. And it is plausible that assholes will be drawn to moral egoism, but I think they would actually find it difficult to lead a rewarding life. Assholes maybe find it hard to care for themselves because they don't really engage in the relationships which lead to a rewarding life. Now we can think about what social rules are compatible with moral egoism. I mentioned Ayn Rand before. She was a libertarian and she wanted small government. But I don't see any particular connection between moderate moral egoism and any big social theory. I guess I would probably favor a kind of a liberal or even a socialist approach to society, and I'd say that actually that's entirely compatible with a lot of moderate moral egoism. I don't think government can demand massive self-sacrifice as a standard. Maybe there are some versions of like communism or maybe some kind of hardcore socialism which say, oh, everybody has to sacrifice themselves for the greater collective. But people, I don't think that's going to work because people just don't want to do that and they don't believe in that. But just a more general sacrificing yourself or putting you and your family first can still fit with the idea that we have a society which enables people to live a good life. And if so suppose you believe that socialism enables people to lead a good life, then moderate moral egoism would be totally compatible with that. So I think the question about which kind of social policies we have and which personal morality we have are entirely separate. So what about justice and the welfare of society? Well, you see, certainly one thing you see with care ethics is that there's big issues about how does the ethics of care fit with justice, and similarly there are going to be similar issues with moderate moral egoism. I think rather obviously, we need a police force. We probably need some armed services. We need infrastructure with roads and public transport, probably public school, waste disposal, healthcare. These are things which are necessary for the running of a modern society. So how you go about that is a separate question from your personal morality of whether you're a moderate moral egoist or something else. Yeah, maybe you want to be a utilitarian about your general social structures. Well, I think there's always going to be problems with utilitarianism. So winding up here, we can ask, well, if you look at some particular issues, what are you going to say about things like factory farming, abortion, and punishment? It seems with factory farming, moderate moral egoism is not going to pay much attention to that. It's not going to be very worried about non-humans. Obviously, if you have pets, you care for your pets. But moderate moral egoism is not going to worry very much about factory farming. Now, you could say that there is the secondary requirements, like once you've cared for yourself, it makes sense to worry about the welfare of others. No, so yeah, I mean, I think you can make a sort of moderate case for not causing suffering if you don't need to, according to moderate moral egoism, because when it involves no sacrifice from yourself. So the moderate moral egoist still has reason to take others into consideration, but they're just not very big in the list of priorities. And if you believe that it is deeply, there's like a lot of suffering that goes on in factory farming, then it could be that you can make a case. Maybe it's not certainly not a top priority, but it's something of a priority to reduce the amount of factory farming. And you can also look at the wider effects of factory farming on society and the climate and the ecosystem, and you could be worried about how that's going to affect your future progeny. And if thinking about the future, I haven't really discussed this, but if you think about the future generations that stem from you, and if you include that as a kind of egoism, then you want to ensure that the future generations of your family line are going to be okay. You might be worried about the climate and so on, and so you might think, well, there's reason to be worried about factory farming. Now with abortion, I think basically it seems pretty straightforward on a personal level that there's nothing particularly wrong with abortion from the point of view of moderate moral egoism. I mean, if it goes against your own self-interest to have an abortion, I mean, then it would be wrong. And if there was like some religious reasons, if you were going to go to hell, then it would be morally wrong because that would be against your own self-interest. But there's no particular reason to take those sorts of predictions about going to hell seriously at all. So it doesn't seem like there's any reason the moderate moral egoist is going to care very much about abortion. Infanticide, I think, is an interesting case. I mean, because it may be one of the biggest worries for those who want to defend moderate moral egoism, because once a baby is born, we have a sort of deep moral intuition these days, at least, that it's wrong to kill that baby. But from the point of view of the moderate moral egoist, if that baby makes your life worse, then and you don't love that baby, then it's far from clear there's anything wrong in killing the baby. So it does seem that moderate moral egoism may have one of its greatest implausibilities there. I guess the way we want to deal with that is that we don't want to live in society where people can just go around killing each other. And so it's against the interests of a moderate moral egoist to live in a society where you can just go around killing each other. And therefore, the moderate moral egoist is going to be in favor of laws against killing babies. So then maybe there's a way where the moderate moral egoist can sort of smuggle in a rule against killing babies because it's ultimately in their own best self-interest. I guess the other thing to say is that there is a kind of strong tendency for people to love babies. I mean, and that's part of the reason that people don't kill their babies all the time, is that they develop bonds during pregnancy, and babies have this strong emotional pull. So once a baby is born, people already feel like they have a strong connection to it. So killing a baby could be experienced as a kind of self-harm, and that would definitely be wrong from the point of view of moderate moral egoism. Now, with questions of like punishing people, I think there's questions about interpersonal relationships and to what extent we blame other people for their actions, and questions of like blame and revenge. They're kind of complicated, and I don't see there's any massive problems for moderate moral egoism there. And then more general social questions about how society should go around punishing people. That's going to be, there's not moderate moral egoism is not going to have a lot to say about that. But so you can just simply say that the public rules that embody a system of justice would address punishment, but that's not something that moderate moral egoism is going to address. All right, so that's as much as I've got to say right now about moderate moral egoism. Like I say, I'm not kind of saying it's the right theory. And certainly it has some implications which seem somewhat problematic, but that's true about just any other moral theory too. So my main claim is that it's as plausible as any other moral theory we have.